Yeah.
That's great.
So
That's
isn't,
Well,
Yeah.
so isn't the guy
right?
from,
You get to hang around
yeah.
with people, that's always fun.
Scott.
Good afternoon.
Goes on today.
Call to order the Strategic Planning Committee special meeting of Wednesday, March 27th. We have a quorum? Yes. Work, thank you. Any public comments on, relative to agenda items? Are there any public comments relative to agenda items? Hearing none, the next order of business is the election of a chairperson. Are there any nominations? Commissioner Mandyke.
Thank you so much. This is Commissioner Mandyke. Thank you, Mr. Stone. I would like to nominate Joan Gentile as Chair of Strategic Planning. I think Joan has been working in the city for over the past 30 years. She did an extraordinary job as a council over at the Hartford. I think she brings many skills and talents to lead this committee, and I would like to nominate her. And I also just wanted to mention that I think Commissioner Avedisian did an amazing job last year setting this up to now hand it off to Joan and bring it to the next step. So I'd also like to thank him for his time and efforts that he did last year as well. But with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to nominate Joan, or Commissioner Gentile. My
Thank you,
apologies.
Commissioner. Second?
Second.
Second. Any other nominations? Seeing none, all those in favor of Commissioner Gentile as your next chairperson of the Strategic Planning Committee, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Any opposed? Any abstentions? It's unanimous. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, everyone. Next order of business is I'd like to open nominations for the position of vice chair.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to put in nomination. I actually came prepared with about a half an hour's worth of remarks, but I decided I would just call them down. I'd like to put the name of David Stuber in nomination for vice chair of the committee. I have worked with Mr. Stuber for a number of years at the city of Hartford, where he was most recently chief of staff for Mayor Ronan. Very talented guy, very thoughtful guy. I think he would serve this committee well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gale. Any second?
Second.
Are there any further nominations? Any further nominations? Hearing none. All those in favor of Commissioner Stuber to be vice chair, say aye.
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 Any opposition? Passes unanimously. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Next item of business are the last meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee was on April 18th, 2023. We've circulated the minutes in advance. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Any corrections? I'd like a motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain, I wasn't present for the previous meeting.
Any other abstentions? Moved. Okay. So reading the minutes from the last meeting reminded me, and I'd like to echo Commissioner Mandyke's thoughts, that this committee did an exceptional job hosting a series of presentations from staff that highlighted the breadth and depth of this organization, the diversity of work that we are engaged in, and really spoke to how they strategically rise to challenges by becoming more efficient and effective without compromising the quality of the services our customers enjoy. So I want to thank Commissioner Avedisian for leading that charge. It is when you're building a strategic plan, the very first step is to understand the scope of the organization. that was done exceptionally well. In addition, I think we need to remember we all will benefit from having a strong strategic plan. Once we have a single vision that is forward focused, the entire organization will be aligned. And that's where the magic happens. So there are 4 hallmarks of a strong strategic plan. And those are, it's purpose-driven, it's forward-thinking, long-term, minimum of 5 years or more, it's actionable, and it's measurable. So I have started poking around the internet, looking for other regional authorities who have posted their strategic plans and found quite a few that are available to the public. And I will share them with district clerk and ask that any information that any of us gather in this process be shared through open text in the strategic planning tab. And it dawned on me that you and your team know better than I and have more specific networks that may scare out even better intelligence that we can use to get better educated on effective strategic plans for similar organizations. So, and I would ask you to follow that same process.
Yes.
So before I start the open mic section and invite everyone to weigh in on what your goals and objectives, your vision, how you want this process to work or not work, I think it would serve us well to take a look back at the process that led us to the latest iteration of the strategic plan that we have, which is quite dated, but I think we can still learn from the process. Commissioner Salemi, I know you worked on that process, and I was hoping you could share a high-level overview of the process, what worked, what didn't work, any lessons learned, how, what was the timeline, what were the drivers, any high-level information you can share that will help us inform our next steps. I'd love to hear that.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would say that the strategic plan that Chair Gentile was talking about was a plan that was approved by the district board in January of 2008. And it actually began more than a year before that. There's some people here that were commissioners and remember that we hired a new CEO in 2005. Chuck Sheehan came to the MDC. Actually, Scott came not too long after that. We were in the middle of doing this strategic plan, I think, when Scott got here. So, but working with Chuck, and I was very familiar with him before he got here. We decided that, and Chair DeBella was the chair then, we decided that we needed the 2 things for the district. One was an asset management plan, which basically looked at everything that we already have and how to take care of it. And the other was a strategic plan, which there was no record of any strategic plan in the past. We're sure there was some. I mean, I don't think we could have accomplished building the reservoirs and the sewage treatment plants without one, but there wasn't one identified as a strategic plan. So it was in 2006 that we decided to go forward, and I would chair of the strategic plan committee. And the district decided to hire a specialty consultant that would actually guide us in putting together a strategic. So I think you all have copies. You sent this out, right, to everybody. So this is just the basic plan that came out. I mean, there were dozens of interviews and other workshops that were produced in order to produce this plan. So just go through it quickly. We started in I think in 2000, early 2007, it took them, in answer to your question, the timelines, it took about a year to put together this plan. It took somewhere close to, actually a little over, but about a year to put it together. So some of the beginnings of it, the forward and everything, just introductory things, but basically established our what the mission of the MDC was, and then establishes the methodology for the planning process. And in order to prepare a strategic plan, they provided some outlines, and so the key to this is that to look at the future of the MDC and where we needed to be. We knew where we were with the asset management plan. We needed to decide where we needed to be in the future. And so it went well beyond the commissioners and the staff of the MDC and involved all the member towns, surrounding towns, other regional agencies. And you can see, if you read this, you can see all kinds of stakeholders in what the MDC performs, and included representatives and town council people and so forth across the district. I was in a survey of what the goals might be, and then we produced the strategic goals. So, and those goals are divided, among different issues. So there's the business goals and what the objectives are with those, organizational goals, and I think what the best part of what came out of this plan was the framework of a strategic plan. This is how you do a strategic plan. That's what we got from the consultant that we had. It was a consultant that's famous for doing this, just this, a strategic plan. So it looks at all the different parts of the MDC and starts to develop what the objectives are of each one of the departments and parts of the district, and of our relationships with the towns and with the state and regulatory agencies and so forth. So for that, for that part, I think it was it's a framework that continues to work. I don't think you need to change the framework. You just need to change the information that pushed into it, through newer and more recent or up-to-date interviews and workshops and so forth. I think those are things that get repeated to see where you are now. It's been 16 years since then, so and the plan looked out for 15 to 20 years is basically where it looked. So I think that if we focus on any part of other than just learning how the plan itself is structured, we focus on the implementation steps, because that's always the hardest part for any kind of plan like this, including the asset management plan, which looked at everything the district owns. How do you own it? How do you maintain it? How do you improve it? So implementation is really important. But once the committee decides where it wants to go with this, I think we have to set a plan up to say, okay, this is how we're going to implement it. There are other agencies, I'm not going to name any, but I've worked in this industry myself. So where, very detailed and very elaborate plans get produced, get paid for, and then they go on a shelf somewhere and they start collecting dust, and so the implementation part is probably the most important thing and that's the goal at the end of creating a strategic plan. If there's any advice I could give us today, it would be to make sure that we have a plan that says exactly how we're going to implement it. And I think that if everyone just read this, it's not a long document. If everybody just read through it, you'd get a good idea where it is, and then I think we can structure it. And so for that matter, I think whether anyone decides or discusses the issue of having some help from a professional consultant in this area, we sort of already have a framework. We might be able to do it without that help, but conducting the interviews, particularly outside the district commissioners and staff itself, probably something that we want to have someone else do, but I think there may be some way we can provide for that. But I think that it's important that we do kind of surveys and questions, that the person asking the questions is seen as like a neutral person somehow. And that's what worked so well for this plan, because it was the consultant that actually did that. If anybody has any questions about it, I don't want to take up any more of our time, but I think that's about the best advice I could give is the collection of data, and then the implementation of the plan is really important. I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions about it. Like you said, it took over a year to do it, and there were multiple meetings. I'll say that when I add up how many hours I put in it, I burned up a lot of my vacation time in 2007 here. It was close to 80 hours of my own time, meeting with the consultants and then as part of the workshops and so forth. But I don't know that that's necessary this time because we have the framework. Any questions or anything, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, Commissioner. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and certainly willing to, continue to be available to talk about this if I have.
I appreciate that. At this point, I'd like to open up the discussion to hear your thoughts, hopes, vision of how we get started on this process. Leveraging work that has been done in the past, building on that foundation that this committee developed about the expertise and the range of work that is done within this organization. And if we kind of use those 4 recognized pillars as the cornerstones, laying over the foundation that's already been laid, I think we are well positioned for success. But I'd like to hear from any and all of you what your thoughts may be. Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm curious as to, it was 15 years ago, how much the regulatory environment has changed, both on DEEP and Health Department. And, those obviously are drivers, and certainly, that time frame is pretty long in a regulatory world. So that's one area I think we have to go from what was the regulatory framework back in that time frame to where we are today and where we are going in the future, to the best of our ability of understanding where the regulators want to go.
Thank you, Commissioner. I know you have experience and probably still have lots of friends in the regulatory agencies, which we will take full advantage of.
Thank
I just add, I think you're absolutely right, but maybe Scott remembers, but I'm trying to remember if the consent decree already existed when we started this or not. We knew we were headed towards the Clean Water Project already by 2008 anyways, for sure, but in 7. So I think that was probably the most important regulatory issue here at the district, was the protection of the Connecticut River and so forth that led to the Clean Water Plan. I don't remember when we first got it. I don't know if you do, or if maybe Attorney Stone remembers. I don't when it.
If I may, Scott Johnson. So, the MDC had consent orders in the 90s, right? In the 80s and 90s, but the real big consent order started in 2004. And that's when the discussions with the Wethersfield Cove occurred. And then the consent order and consent decrees came in 2005 and 6 respectively. So that's when we started the consent order. We physically started construction on those activities in 2008.
But it's that one issue, and I thank you for doing, because that's one of the reasons we did the strategic plan. Was that one consent order has cost us to spend $2 billion since then, so it had to become part of what we were going to do. We're going to spend more money on that than we do on the MDC. So, at that point, on the operations in the MDC. So You're right, but I think that there are a number of things that happened since then that are important issues on the regulatory side of what we do. So that should be examined, I think, in detail, about this.
Thank you. Commissioner Adel, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Thank you. I had to unmute myself. I think 2 points I would raise would be first, and I think that the chairman has already started down this path, which is to make sure that the mayors and or the town managers, but I think they're all mayors in those our towns, be on board with the process and have input, as I think it was mentioned earlier on. So I want to make sure we follow up on that. I've already approached my mayor and town manager about asking for their input on this. And then secondly, we've proved, I think, $50,000 for a consultant. So at some point we have to, sooner than later, I want us to move towards finding a consultant here. But that would be my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Patel.
I think we should first decide if we are going to have consultant or in-house, because there was a discussion. And in my opinion, we have to have somebody outsider consultant. Depending upon how much you rely on, what scope you develop is up to us. But that should be the case. Otherwise, if we depend on our own staff and back and forth, that's probably not good focused direction. Second thing is, we have to identify strategically what has changed, which one are our priorities, and then work with them. And then at some point in time, with that framework, we approach the town and town managers and mayors to get their input. Simply approaching town managers, etc., without us developing some tentative plan or basically framework will be not useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Mandike.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. This is Commissioner Mandike. After going through the last strategic plan, I just had a couple of quick comments that I think that we should consider. The first is, I think there's a step before we go in and hire consultants and start to get knee deep into writing a new strategic plan. I think one of the things, staff did an extraordinary job helping us understand where we are, but I think that was internally focused. So now what I think we need to do is, look at our towns, our region, and even our state plans of conservation and development. Where do they align with any of water or waste in there? Do they have any infrastructure conversations? It would be a pretty easy cursory look through them to see what they say in those plans. Again, to Commissioner Slemy's point, it's not about just writing a plan and putting it on a shelf. We have to try and do something with it. So we should look at those. We should also potentially, I've been a huge advocate of this, about looking at each of our member towns and having them come in and give a presentation about where their economic development is occurring, where their infrastructure is happening, so we understand where they're going in the next 0 to 20 years and how they're doing it, because I think it helps develop our strategic plan. So like I said, I think we already have our internal kind of update. I think we need our external update at this point. And then I think it's also very important when we look at this, because there's a big debate right now on strategic plans about whether or not how useful they are these days, and whether or not we should be pulling away from strategic plans because of how fast paced things are going. And I would encourage this committee and then the board to look at some scenario planning. And I'm not just talking about if something breaks at one of our water treatments, if the levees go down. We're talking about different things. If we get major funding, if we don't get major funding, there's a lot of, it's not a doomsday scenario planning. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to sit there and go, did we ever think that, we were going to have this kind of money on an infrastructure basis, and we could have been, and this is no offense against staff, but we could have been better prepared to grab more infrastructure dollars if we had just planned that out a little bit more about, are we ready? What can we do to be ready? So I would like to see in any kind of planning process that we go through more of a scenario based, what if we go through a major drought? What if we don't? You know, how, if we add another town, if we don't add another, there's all kinds of situations I think that we can look at, and we should highlight some of those and at least have conversations and discussions behind them.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Stuber.
Picking up on a number of things that Commissioner Mandyke just said, I fully agree with a number of the points that she just made. First of all, to the question of whether or not strategic planning still has value in a modern context where, you know, new circumstances are rapidly evolving, I would argue that it's even more important to kind of have a long-term vision and plan to kind of anchor you and kind of orient you over the long haul, so that you don't get swept away by the happenings of unexpected events in the near term, so that you kind of have a course, and that you've also done some, you know, risk assessment and contingency planning so that you're not completely thrown for a loop when something unexpected does occur, and you have at least a rough draft of a plan to turn to for how to address something that might reasonably have been expected. I fully endorse her comment also about the importance of having reaching a point of synergy with all of our member towns around their economic development plans so that MDC's efforts can be fully aligned there. And to the chairwoman's point, I think that hearing from each of our member towns about their needs in the way of water and sewer and how that aligns with their economic development needs going forward is very important. Along those lines, and also picking up on another thing that Commissioner Mandyke just said about creating opportunities for us to, for the MDC to avail ourselves of funding opportunities when they arise. I would love to see, speaking as a representative from Hartford, either as part of this master plan or, sorry, the strategic plan, or as a project perhaps we've recommended under it, we'd love to see a master plan developed for the sewer system in Hartford, so that we not only had a roadmap laid out for the years ahead in terms of needed improvements to that system, so we could do related capital planning, but also recognizing that, you know, the challenges are severe or quite large there, and that they're growing. You know, we've all done this board and the staff have done an enormous amount of work in recent years to adapt to the unprecedented levels of stormwater-driven flooding that we've seen. Recognizing that challenges there are substantial and that we're going to need, in all likelihood, large amounts of federal dollars in order to fully address those problems, particularly over the long haul. To the extent that we've done the planning work up front, that we have a master plan in place, and we have, as it were, shovel-ready projects identified when funding opportunities come up, we'll be better positioned to, you know, take advantage of them and, you know, minimize impact to our ratepayers on that basis.
Excellent. Commissioner Salemi.
Thank you. Just to, you know, this plan that was produced for and approved in 2008 has behind it, it didn't get published, but it had behind it a prioritization scheme. And this is not something that, you know, involved people's opinions. This was based on facts, and it's an equation, basically. You know, it's an algorithm, I would say, you know, that included, you know, how important is it to do this project, and do we have the money to do the project? Do we have the ability to do it ourselves? Do we need a contractor to do this? And those sort of get multiplied in this algorithm, and you get a value, you know. So that puts the one with the biggest value goes right to the top of the list, you know. And I give you an example of why it's important to have the priorities drive the implementation of the plan. You have to have, you know, priorities that drive it. You can't just bounce around in it, you know, and do what you think you can get done now. And I'll give you the example that I gave, and this is from my own professional background, because this is what I do for a living, all right? So you own a building, and you got the roof leaks, and it's damaging stuff inside. But somebody shows up, this is actual fact, okay, from projects that I worked on. somebody shows up and says, I want to do the interiors. I'll donate, $5 million to redo the interiors of the building, but you got to do new ceilings and all the rest of the stuff. And then we look back at the strategic plan and say, well, this guy wants to give us $5 million, but we got to do the interior. We can't do that before we fix the roof because it's still leaking on the interior. And the fire marshal just told us that we need sprinklers, so we can't do the ceilings over until we do the sprinklers first and everything. So those things, you have to kind of blend all those things. And that's why there's a little algorithm that makes it work so that, you can't just impose something move it to the top of the list when it's really not at the top of the list. So, but those are all things that have to get analyzed. So you create the priorities first. And I would say, with respect to the relationships with the towns. So again, Scott and Chris can, if I say this wrong, please correct me, okay? In 2008, we established a referendum for $800 million. The first referendum was 800 million. And, it got approved. The second one got approved even easier than the first one, but it got approved. But it didn't say where the 800 million was coming from. And so the towns had a lot of input in that. So if that was just going to come from the ad valorem, think about what that would have done to the ad valorem. If you added 800 million and then 4 years later, another 800 million, what would that have done to the ad valorem? So how do we pay for the clean water project? Do we pay for it with the ad valorem? We pay for it on your water bill. That's how you pay for it. So, on the ad valorem side, the towns couldn't handle that much pressure on the tax rate, on the mill rate. It was going to have to drive it up. We had, Bill, what was the average back then? Like 4% of the tax of the mill rate went to the MDC, of the revenue went to the MDC, somewhere around there, something like that. And it would have driven it for all the towns, if they stayed the same, would have driven it above that. So funding for what you have to do in the strategic plan becomes a major issue of how you get that funding. We got the approval to spend 800 million, but we had to figure out where we're going to get this 800 million. There's a series of loans and grants and so forth that came from the state and the EPA, but the ones we have to pay back are paid back through the clean water charge on the water bill. So that's very strategic, because with the interviews with the towns and an understanding of the position that they were in, we had to come to a conclusion with something that we didn't want to do, but put it on the water bill was not the first choice, but it's where it wound up because it basically delivered the clean water charge to the water bill, but our water bill is still not bigger than other water bills in the state. Even with the clean water charge, we were able to maintain that. So, but that was all, through the strategic planning process and through the planning process for the clean water project, especially. The towns had that much input into it where we had to make a decision whether they could handle doing the funding or not. Hope that answers some of your questions, how important town.
Commissioner Taylor.
Yes, I think strategic planning is important. And I think it's important for one very critical reason that is emerging, and that is whether or not we're going to be careful about having what I would characterize as a sustainable future. I think that when you look at our position in this state in terms of the amount of water and the source of our water, the purity of that water, and the fact that if you look at the surrounding towns, both within and without the district's franchise area, there are a number of critical issues that are arising there that, quite frankly, I think unless we at least give them some thought and have a discussion with people both at the state, federal, and local level, we may be getting the cart before the horse. And let's not kid ourselves. If water really becomes scarce in this state, what's going to happen is that they're going to start looking at the people who have the water. We're one of the biggest players in town. And quite frankly, the state and everyone else is going to be in here clamoring. I think that we need to think carefully about that. What happens if you get a lot of new member towns in? What does this do to the dynamic of this organization? What kind of stresses and strains does it put on it? One very simple issue. You've got water. How do you move it throughout the state? Who's going to make a decision on that? And on whose nickel, if that becomes an issue, if you've got to move water, how do you do it? Who's in charge of it? Who builds it? Who runs it? I think that there are some very broad issues that I think that we need to take a look at. That's why I think it's important that we get professional help in here. And I think that we take a very careful, broad look at what I would characterize as our environment. I would also suggest that you folks, if you're going to be on this committee, you try to find things to read them. This was a very extensive report that was done by Australia. And I think it gives you a pretty good idea of how to frame the kind of thing that we're going to do, because it takes a look at a number of things. And all of the things that they talk about here are all of the factors that come into play in this. But I just think it's important that we do this thoughtfully and carefully. I think the scope of this strategic plan has expanded far beyond what it was in 2006. And I just think that we need to be careful and focus on that.
Anyone else? Chairman Curry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Commissioner Curry. I'm not an emotional person, but I'm really excited about this prospect of developing a new strategic plan. And listening to several of the commissioners tonight, you know, I'm not going to say it's not going to be difficult, but it's going to be logical. And as we move forward with the strategic plan, we've got a lot of other issues to deal with. And I think we're going to see some overlap. Commissioner Stuber mentioned capital improvement plan. We're in the midst of seriously looking at doing an employee climate study. And all of those types of different activities that the board is about to embark on, we're going to crisscross. But the most exciting part about this is that we're forcing ourselves not just to gain a better understanding of where we are and where we need to be. And, you know, and I think about, and not to belittle where we were in 2000, but it's like, you know, my first computer was a Commodore 64, and now we're talking about data centers and AI. MDC is an entirely different place. It's an entirely different company, an entirely different business. And while water and sewer is still our primary function, we've gotten so far from where we were 25 years ago. So I'm just suggesting that as we communicate with each other, the respective MDC commissioners from each of the towns take the time to meet with their town leaders. Take the time to meet with your legislative delegation. East Hartford did that last year, and we found it to be, would exhilarating be a good word, Bud? It was certainly a surprise as to what we thought they knew and what they really knew. So it's a good help for them and the town leaders as well to gain a better understanding of what MDC really is all about, other than piping water and sending a bill for ad valorem. What I would like to see, aside from what's been discussed, that when we eventually make a recommendation to the board to adopt and implement a strategic plan, we also include, and I'll just pick a number, it may be different in everyone else's mind, but this is something I believe we should do every 5 years. So along with that, I would hope that at some point we can determine how many years we need, each year we need to do a strategic plan. So I'm looking forward to where we go.
Too. Commissioner DeBella.
Again, I think there's great ideas as we sit around this table and talk about it, but I truly believe the first order of business has got to be to seek professional direction in terms of putting a strategic plan together and bringing information together to structure it. I remember when we started 2007, Scott, wasn't it? We started with strategic plan. That we
7, yeah.
6 and 7. The end of
I believe it was
2006, yeah. There's so many changes coming at us in this region, from large city like Hartford to the suburban towns and development. Commercial real estate, major problem in downtown in Hartford. Residential real estate, booming. Those are issues we've got to deal with. PFAS, technology changes, a whole series of issues with regard to our towns and how they interface with other towns in the region. In Hartford, we're meeting with a new mayor. We have a new mayor. We have not a new council as much as a mayor, and that mayor has got different ideas on direction. We have as a delegation, I believe it's next week, we have a meeting with our new mayor. I think the question of PFAS is another issue that we're going to be faced with. Our water resources are stronger than anybody in the state of Connecticut. And as we look around the state of Connecticut, water, drinkable, potable water is a key issue and where we're going. Some of the strategies that DEEP is developing on stream flow has major impacts on where we're going to go with our water. Those are all issues that have got to be part of a strategic plan. It's got to be in coordination with our towns. But I think the first order of business is to seek professional direction on how we would do it, how we arrange it, and then start moving through that process. And listen, when the Clean Water Project, we knew from the beginning when we dealt with the regulatory body of DEEP that we were telling them that we couldn't do this in 12 years, and the strategy was being pressured on us that it had to be done in 12 years. Fast forward, it took us 3 years to get the integrated plan adopted. So the regulatory process has definitely gotten more difficult, and the issues of stormwater and things like that that have to be solved by a regional body, our solid waste and everything else. They're all part of a strategic plan that we're looking at. Not that we're going to take anything over. There's going to be some kind of participation in it. So I think it's a great time, and I think you're right, Mr. Chairman, that we ought to, when we build this strategic plan, it should be revised every 5 years so that we stay abreast of what's happening.
Thank you. Any other commissioners want to offer any comments? Commissioner Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As far as, I'm happy to see that that we're going to be working on a strategic plan. I think as far as doing it every 5 years, I think that might be a little too fast. I think maybe it should be done similar to the POCDs, which is every 10 years. I think that might make a little more sense, but it's something to consider. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Any other comments before we move on? I want to thank, the energy is great. The ideas are incredible. I see so many opportunities and I feel confident we're going to be able to hit the ground running. The next item it just happens to be fortuitous since our CEO did recently meet with many of our member towns, and we were hoping we could hear more about what you learned in that.
Yes, thank you, Scott Jellison. So we specifically met with our town engineering staff, and we invited town managers and mayors, but we basically got technical staff to specifically discuss the water master plan. And I'm just going to use this as an example of strategic planning. So it's important for staff to understand, like, we have approval from the board to move forward with the master plan. That's strategic on a staff level because that dictates staffing levels, debt service levels. It drives the budgetary process over a 5, 10, 7-year period. So it's very important to have clear direction from the board in the strategic plan. Here's what we want you to achieve, right? We want you to achieve X. And so we did meet with the towns. We gave the same presentation that we gave to the board, to the Water Bureau and to the full board. They were very receptive. We talked about all the details and the reasons why we selected the option we did, which is to build a new treatment plant at Filter. We also talked about the rate structure. And so it was very, we didn't have full participation, but we did have the majority of the towns at the meeting. We did take the opportunity, since they were there, to talk to them about the lead and copper rule, which we presented as well, just to let them be informed as to what that means and how that's going to impact our towns. So that was very well received. So also did take the opportunity to explain to them we're trying, and I don't know if we have a date yet, Julie, but we're trying desperately to schedule the discussion about stormwater. And we had a long discussion about stormwater, and I'm going to give you the example I gave. I won't say which town, but I'm going to give an example of why stormwater should be considered under the strategic planning, because the Clean Water Project started in 1974, and as Commissioner knows, MDC is now executing it 20 years later, right? 30 years later, 50 years later. And some towns haven't even started, right? Some towns, Bridgeport, New Haven, they're doing a little bit, but it takes a long time to execute regulation. Flint, Michigan happened in 2014, and we're now just dealing with the lead and copper rule because of that. So stormwater, it's stormwater, as we now realize, is the real nemesis to our sewer system. And we had a long discussion regarding why should it be regionalized? What's the benefit to all of our towns? Well, I'm going to give very, very specific examples. Recently, last week in West Hartford, as we know, West Hartford, their dry weather flow discharging to their sewer system, which is ours in their town, is 8 million gallons a day, dry weather flow. No rain, dry weather flow. And on the wet weather, it goes to 80. And it's because of all the majority of that wet weather flow, 90-some-odd% of that wet weather flow is coming from homes, businesses, and leaky pipes. But the majority of it is coming from illegal flow from the town of West Hartford. And the majority of it actually hurts West Hartford more than it hurts Hartford. It does hurt Hartford, but it also hurts West Hartford. So the Yukon development is looking to connect to our system. And as we have said to the Hartford developments and other developments, what we said to the development was, you must remove, you're going to discharge 70,000 gallons of dry weather flow a day to our system when this first phase of the development is executed. And so in order for you not to make it worse for everyone else surrounding this, you must, whether it's the town or the development, you must remove 70,000 gallons of wet weather flow. And we have a somewhat of a agreement on that, and we say, and you got to pay for it. So the question becomes Stormwater Authority. So by the Yukon development occurring in West Hartford, I'm going to pick East Hartford and Windsor as an example. They both benefit because if everything's stagnant and our ad valorem stays at 54 million this year and next year is 54 million, if West Hartford collects more revenue, and they're a higher percentage of the total, and therefore they pay more than on the 54 million. So all of our towns are paying less, so you benefit. So why is it important for West Hartford to remove stormwater from the system so that they can develop? Why is it important for us to remove stormwater from Hartford so you can develop? So the more you can develop, the more revenue you receive and the higher percentage of ad valorem you become, and every town develops. So that's what regionalism is. So this is a really important topic. We've talked, CROG, Matt Hart, who used to be the manager of town manager of West Hartford, they have received, or they're about to receive, $250,000 in a grant to perform. They've already been talking about strategically stormwater authority for the 38 towns. And so it's a big topic, not just here in our 8-member towns, it's everywhere. And everyone is starting to realize that the 1974 Clean Water Act, although that addressed the treatment plants as well, but this stormwater capacity issue is being driven by something outside of the purview of the Clean Water Act. It's stormwater. And the more stormwater we can remove, we've already had discussions with Newington. They've had 2 developments that were put on hold because the neighbors complained that the housing developments were going to make it worse for the local communities surrounding them with wet weather flow. And so every town is going to see this. And as every town gets restricted by development, you're not able to grow. You're not able to increase your revenue. And by not increasing your revenue in West Hartford, it hurts East Hartford, or it hurts every other town. So this is a really important discussion. We should decide strategically, do we want to get involved in stormwater? Don't we? You know? But that's just an example of a really important direction for staff, because, you know, we've got a plan for that. I mean, what happened in North Hartford, and I've said this 1,000 times, we reacted in the middle of the budget year to something that we weren't planning to do. We were not planning to spend $180 million in North Hartford. We were planning to spend $47 million over a 10-year period. And we're doing it, and we're going to get it done, and we're getting it done. But that's not a strategy, right? We are forced into that, but it's a good thing. It's a positive thing, and it will actually change the future of the Clean Water Project moving forward, not just for MDC, but for all other, I believe all other communities across the country are going to be using our model as Clean Water Project a scope, which is to provide a community benefit, which will in turn provide a benefit to the river that we're trying to protect under EPA. So it's a really big discussion, but I just would hope under the strategic plan that it's really not too specific, but it gives a footprint of what staff is, what you expect from staff, what you expect from me, what I expect from my staff, and that helps us with human resources, staffing, budgeting, and debt service. You know, a silly example could be a strategic plan would be to not allow our water rate to grow more than 5% a year or something like that. Okay, so that's my job to make that happen, right? Here's all the things we need to do to make that happen. We've been very successful in having 0% increases over the last couple of years, but that's would be very helpful if the strategic plan could, you know, give direction to staff on what we're working on a daily basis, on a yearly basis, on a 5-year basis. And that way we can plan around that. I've mentioned before, you know, our staffing level, we've shifted our staffing level away from construction because the majority of the work was the tunnel. So from 2008 to 2013, we're doing separation works. We needed a lot more inspectors on the ground in the field. And then we shifted, we migrated to the tunnel. We didn't need as many. And we shifted that workforce, as I showed you the other night, to utility services. So now we're doing more in utility services that was done with consultants before. So the strategy really will drive staff in terms of what our expectations are from the board and the committees, and how we and then how we obviously hopefully execute that correctly.
Sure.
Any questions for Scott?
Yeah. Sure. Scott, thanks. That's a great example with UConn, but it reminds me of something else that happened very much like that, and you were here, I think, when we did it. But what you said about, expectations, we have to have expectations for ourselves too, for the commission, not just for the staff. I mean, this is not all on the staff. We have to be able to do something. And I'd say that in dealing with other agencies, not just the towns, but other agencies, for instance, in this subject, the stormwater, is it Stormwater Commission? It's Hartford, West Hartford, Newington, Weathersfield.
Hartford Flood Commission.
Yeah, Hartford Flood Commission. It's key. It's a key. The stormwater plan is going to have to include the Hartford Flood Commission, because just East Hartford and Rocky Hill are the only ones that are not part of it. I think Windsor and Bloomfield are also part of it. So the Flood Commission, maybe not Windsor. I'm not sure, but backing up to Blueback Square. Blueback Square was the biggest development that the MDC region saw when it happened. There was nothing bigger than Blueback Square. But they were lucky in a way, because they were sitting on top of Trout Brook. So this separation was relatively easy to take care of. And we met with the engineers from West Hartford when they were doing that. So the stormwater from Blueback Square goes into Trout Brook. It doesn't go into the MDC system. At least that's what I understand anyways. The UConn is a different question. It's not as easy. It's not going to be as easy to deal with. But if you don't have the Flood Commission as part of it, that's sort of on us. We really have to make the other public agencies come together. It's not just on you and the staff, Scott. So that's part of what we need to do with the strategic plan, is to identify all the parties that have some sort of issue or some relationship. We need a strategic relationship with the Flood Commission. If we're going to be working on stormwater, that's absolutely necessary. And I don't think we have one right now. We have a relationship with them, but it's not where we're working together on specific issues. I think we need to get there somehow. We need to give our staff the ability to do that with them. That's on us.
Commissioner Silver?
Thank you. Just for a point of clarification, just for the board, I certainly agree with the Commissioner just now that there should be a relationship with the Flood Commission in Hartford. But just to clarify what the entity is for and what its statutorily driven purpose is, the name is a bit of not a misnomer, but it could be a bit misleading. That body has a specific charge to look at the river levee and its maintenance and long-term care. So the stormwater river flooding that we see, say, in the Blue Hills neighborhood of Hartford, is really outside the purview of that entity as it's currently constructed. And so that's kind of a common point of kind of a misunderstanding. It's a broader discussion around stormwater. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out there for everyone's benefit and understanding. Beyond that, I would just sort of, I'd like to thank the CEO for his comments just now. I fully agree with everything that he said. How's that, Scott? And I think and I appreciate the importance of, and I fully support myself the having regional discussions around stormwater, because I think that as we, particularly since we're here to talk about strategic planning and about the long term, as climate change continues to progress, the way that that's manifesting itself in our part of the world is more rainfall. And so the stormwater problem is only going to grow in its magnitude as we move ahead 5, 10, 20, 25, 50 years into the future. And so it behooves us as early as possible to start thinking about what that long-term picture is going to look like and planning accordingly. The more that we do that planning work now, the less it will cost us over the long term to make the necessary adaptations. And so I really just want to encourage kind of like a long-term vision in that vein. in much the same way that the folks who founded the MDC many years ago and who originally built the reservoir system, even prior to the founding of the MDC, I believe, have created assets that we're all continuing to benefit from today that lasted for many generations. Toward that end, I would say that while it's important to think about measures to reduce the input of stormwater into the system, and that's a valuable way to try to control the stormwater problem on one side of the ledger, we also do need, I think, to be thinking about capital improvement as well, as particularly over the long term, as measures on the other side of the ledger, as it were, to address the stormwater problem. Because particularly, even the problems we're seeing today is substantial and as severe as they are, I believe are only really going to grow. And so additional infrastructure and additional capital investment is unfortunately, I think, going to be unavoidable if we want to kind of continue to not only serve our residents at the current levels that they're expecting, but also in order to be able to facilitate, the economic growth that Connecticut and our metro region, needs and deserves in order to be successful over the decades to come.
Thank you. Commissioner DeBella, did you have a comment?
No, I'm glad they've raised that issue because the notion is sort of a misnomer. It's a skeleton that exists and hasn't been really functioning, and that's one of the things we have to have a discussion with the new mayor.
Sure.
Scott Jelson. So, and I agree with everything Commissioner Stewart said. But the one thing that our non-Hartford towns have to think about is if I'm going to pick on West Hartford, right? Because West Hartford's doing a great job. They've actually hired CDM. They've identified $300 million worth of stormwater work. They've recognized that it's their responsibility to do this. We give them all the credit in the world for that. It's going to take a long time, but they're going to do it. And they've already identified about a $12 million project to build a 72-inch storm pipe, which is awesome, which is great. But we just got to think about this. And we talked about the flood commission, and it's been almost non-existent for a long time, right? But if our member towns like Wethersfield, Newington, and West Hartford actually do their job, put in storm pipe, and separate the stormwater from our system, where does that stormwater go? Hartford. It's going to come to Hartford. So if we beg West Hartford to do its job and they do their job, it's going to impact Hartford. And so it's impacting Hartford now with the treatment plant, but it's going to impact Hartford at the stormwater flood commission system, the pump stations, because the pump stations operate within the 7 pump stations within the city under the Flood Control Commission. They operate based on elevation of river. So as the river gets higher, certain pumps kick on and kick off based on closing gates throughout the system. So it's all interconnected. You cannot separate it. And so the answer is one way or another, Hartford's going to be impacted either through the CSO system in Hartford, the sewer system, and the treatment plant, or through the flood control system or the pump stations. So it's a really important topic. And if we could all do this in the 80s or the 90s and said to every town, get your stormwater out of the MDC sewer system, we would not have spent $800 million at the treatment plant in Hartford. We might have spent some to improve it and upgrade it, but we wouldn't have increased capacity. We increased the wet weather capacity by 200 MGD. So that's an expense. And we would not have had to build a CSO tunnel for another $1 billion. So, we've got to start thinking about this because as one of the strategic plans we've talked about, and I hold myself accountable to 10 miles of water main a year. Why? Well, because if you don't, our break history, you spend more money in operations and overtime than debt service. So I put that self-imposed responsibility on myself and my staff. But that's a strategy because that dictates staffing levels, that dictates debt service, that dictates your water rate projections for the next 20 years. So that's a real strategy as to what does the board want. Do you want to be the lowest water rate in the region like we are today for the next 20 years? Well, then you work back and say yes. So what do we have to do that? And so it's really it's great to hear this conversation because there's a lot of good things we can set forth for the next 20 years in guiding the direction of where we want to go and what we want to focus our money on, our resources and our staffing resources on.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? All right, the next item, do we have any members of the public who want to offer comments? Anyone from the public who want to make a comment?
Yes, I had trouble unmuting myself.
Right.
One of the things that I think is above all important is to be sure that we're all on the same page in terms of a mission statement. I think somebody talked about how things have changed so much over the years. And I think it's important to make sure we're all rowing in the same direction. And I hope that through the whole process, that the MDC be open to listening to others. I think so often you're perceived as telling everybody stuff, posing as the expert on stuff and not letting very much input from outside. And I think by listening, you get even a broader scope of information to work with. And I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Any other public comments? Seeing none. Commissioner requests for future agenda items. Anyone have something they want us to include on a future agenda? Commissioner Taylor.
Yes, I think in discussing all of this, I think an issue that is absolutely paramount, and we sort of dance around and talk about it, but we don't really deal with it, I think, the way we should be. And that is the whole notion of how do you pay for this? However we lay this out and however we approach this, I think that we need to have some difficult conversations. For example, the linchpin in all of this, whether you like it or not, is Hartford. And you've got the member towns that are sort of orbiting around Hartford like satellites. But different people have different capabilities in terms of financing. And I think that we need to really talk about this and get it out on the table. Because if you look at the load which Hartford is carrying, and when I talk about the load, I'm talking about everything from schools to you name it. And if you look at the base that it has in terms of the money to pay for those things, anything that we lay out here in terms of a strategic plan that results in a development or in an operational sense, that has a cost. That's got to be financed. And that money's got to come from somewhere. And the issue, I think, is that we just need to take a tough, hard look at that and make sure that we really understand what's entailed there in terms of the financing. In the old days, when the feds paid for 80%, 20% would have been on our plate. That's not the case now. So I think that's one of the difficulties that we have. Highways are paid 80-20. but we don't have that luxury. Or basically, we've got to think long-term about changing that process to get maybe the 80-20 back into place. And we're not the only ones on that tip or that spear point. Infrastructure work basically is extremely expensive, and most localities, standing alone, don't have the financial power to do it. And I think that's something that we just need to be very careful about. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll make sure to add that on a future agenda. With that, I'm willing to accept a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor? Whoever objects.